Welcome to the November 2024 Research Lightning Talks hosted by the Center for Research and Creative Activity. Thank you to everyone for attending today and to all of you who have contributed to our past events as well. Today, we have 6 presenters who will be discussing this month's topic, partnering with Cooperative Ecosystem Studies Units, also known as CESUs. I will introduce each speaker before their presentation, and then each presentation will be followed by 1 to 2 questions from the audience. Audience, after each presenter has finished speaking, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your questions. After all 6 presenters have finished, we will open up breakout rooms so that you can visit with the presenters of your choice to discuss any insights or questions you may have. And with that, we will begin with our first speaker, Dr. Bob Reinhardt.
Well, thank you very much, Catherine, and thanks for Dread for putting all this together. I appreciate it. It's good to see so many friendly faces, especially Pei-Lin, who's here, who I succeeded in the role as Boise State representative to the Rocky Mountain Cooperative Ecosystem Studies Unit. Catherine, do you have my slide?
I do, yes.
Okay.
Would you like me to?
Yeah, why don't we look at that?
Okay,
this is my 3 minutes, right?
Yeah, I can wait and start your 3 minutes.
No, let's do it. No, I just wanted to say, yeah, so I've titled this Mutual Benefits for Federal Agencies and Boise State Faculty, or to quote Casablanca, this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. So for those who don't know, these CESUs, the idea is to partner federal agency needs within the area of ecosystem studies, which is very broadly defined, partner those needs with university expertise. Boise State in the last 5 years has had more than 60 of these kinds of agreements with more than $10 million of funding coming in. Those agreements have ranged anywhere between $1,500 and almost $1 million. The median is about $30,000 for these agreements. There are lots of advantages to the CESU system to using this funding mechanism. One of those is that we have established contracts and agreements with these federal agencies that sort of smooths the process of putting this funding arrangement into place. It is an easier or easy-ish process compared to other funding mechanisms. And there's also the advantage of the overhead of the F&A being 17.5%. There are challenges with this in that often relationships are required, by which I mean relationships with the agencies, relationships with specialists within those agencies, or at least a relationship with the agency to understand how that agency uses the CESU mechanisms, because every agency is a little bit different. And you have to get to know how those agencies use the CESU system, or even in some cases, whether people at those agencies even know about this mechanism. That can be a little bit of a challenge. The process is generally the same, though, depending, it doesn't really matter which agency. First of all, relationships have to be built, even if that relationship is just understanding how the agency uses the mechanism. Then there's the matching of the agency need to university expertise. And then usually the agency develops and drafts an RFP on its own, which then goes out, and then faculty provide their proposal for it. It is accepted, and then it becomes an official agreement run through all the different channels at Boise State. Those are some really important things to know. I would also say one more important thing to know is pencil in, maybe even put it in pen, March 13th in the morning, in the space in CID, a faculty and agency brunch mixer event so that you can participate in this relationship building process to leverage this really excellent mechanism for funding current projects and also hopefully building out to bigger agreements and relationships and friendships with these agencies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bob. We'll open up for any questions that the audience may have.
I see Pei-Lin's hand, although that feels unfair because, again, I'm constantly trying to fill Pei-Lin's enormous shoes that she left when I succeeded her as the representative to the Rocky Mountain. And I'll be succeeding Steve Novak as the representative to the Great Basin CESU. I should have mentioned that. But go ahead, Pei-Lin, quiz me. See how I'm doing on this job that you gave me.
Actually, I'm trying to throw you a softball. Are you going to have a time to talk about your research project with the CESU, your big one?
Oh, that's really kind of you. I will say I've had a couple of CESU agreements, one with the National Park Service, but the one that I'm working on right now is with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which is a 5-year, nearly $1 million agreement to study places in the Willamette Valley that were displaced or eliminated to make way for large dams. It's been a really positive experience and really has the word cooperative is instrumental because it's not just getting money from them. It is they supply expertise, they supply resources. When we have meetings, this is not just about me saying, here, I'm going to go do this thing, or you tell me what to do. We're all talking about what this is supposed to look like. When I describe CESU agreements, I describe them as not grants and not contracts. It's not just a bucket of money that you're given to go do your thing. And it's also not them saying, you got to go do this. It is a cooperative funding agreement. And you can see more at drowntowns.com. I see another hand. Yeah, Moji, yes.
Quick question. So, first of all, thank you so much for leading this very important initiative that we have at Boise State. It's very useful. I've benefited from this quite a lot. So thank you for that. I was wondering what is the level of funding that needs an RFP? So is there a certain limit beyond which they will have to announce an RFP and a call and all those stuff or not?
Moji, my computer cut out right as you said like the critical part of your question. Could you say that again? Sorry.
Yeah, well, the question is, so what is the level, or is there a threshold for this to become competitive? Like when is it, or what level of funding is required for a competition, and what level of funding does not need that?
That's a great question. That's a great question because it's part of this bigger question of every agency having its own rules about this. So, and even within agencies, parts of agencies having their own rules. So I'll give you an example. With the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, it was below $1 million, made this process easier, but it was still an open RFP. And generally speaking, these are open RFPs. It is often the case, though, that by the time it gets to an RFP, it's very clear what this project is and who has the expertise. And so when looking at some of these RFPs, it's very clear like, oh, there's one person that can do this. And so you can see that. But that is not always the case. So I was just yesterday meeting with some folks from the BLM, and they cited the number of $200,000 as being, if you go over that, then that triggers a series of other requirements. So I'm going to answer your question in 2 ways. One, typically, and Pei-Lin, please correct me. Typically, these do ultimately go through an open RFP process that is technically competitive, but is often set up in such a way or is described in such a way that there are few people or universities that could address that. And then secondly, when it comes to the dollar amount, this is part of that understanding the relationship and understanding the agency to figure out when does a higher dollar amount trigger additional concerns, not concerns, but rather expectations.
Thank you.
What did I do, Pei-Lin? Did I get it right?
Sounds good.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We'll go ahead and stop the questions there so we can move on to our next speaker. But thank you so much, Dr. Reinhardt, for introducing CESUs and introducing the event happening in March. That's so exciting. So we'll go ahead and move on to our next speaker, Dr. James McNamara. Jim McNamara is a distinguished professor in the Department of Geosciences at Boise State University, where he teaches classes on water in the environment. His research focuses on watershed hydrology, mostly in snow-dominated regions. Dr. McNamara established the interdisciplinary Masters of Science degree in hydrologic science and currently leads the Blue Water Initiative to integrate water-related academic programs across campus. Today, he's going to be talking to us about the hydrologic implications of a declining mountain snowpack.
All right, thank you, Catherine. I think I'll spend most of the time After talking more about the relationship, it seems like that's probably what most people are interested in, is establishing relationship, and maybe not so much about the specific science. So I just have a few panels that I'll work through here. This on the left prompts me to talk about the relationship. So my partner agency, I'll call it, is the USDA, Department of Agriculture Research Service, in particular, a group called the Northwest Watershed Research Center. It's a group that is focused in Boise here that does what we'll call long-term hydrological monitoring at field sites. So my title, I added place-based research in the Great Basin. And so the relationship and how this got established, I put since 1998 here. I don't know when CESU or CESU came into play, but my partnership with this group started just kind of serendipitous. The week after I moved here in August 1997, actually, and I'm a hydrologist, and there was a very large rain event in August that they actually were evacuating the north end because floods were supposed to come down all the creeks. And I said, well, I'm going up to check it out because I'm a hydrologist. And in the dark, in the middle of the night, was another guy walking around checking it out. And it turned out to be a hydrologist at the Northwest Watershed Research Center. And we said, we should write a proposal together about this. And we did. And that was my first funded project. And that was a relationship that then lasted for a few years. And somewhere in that process of having other grants and projects, we had heard about the CESU program. So it was a relationship that I had already had established. To kind of highlight one of Bob's points, is that the relationship matters. And at the time, and this could be also a question to Bob and Pei-Lin, is that we had heard about this, but very few other people on campus did. This might have been in the early 2000s, I'm not sure. And so it was a process to get it started, because we would go to OSP, which was called something different at the time, and we want to use the CESU relationship, and they didn't know what it was, and neither did. It was just something that we saw on the internet. So I don't know what has changed since then, because what has happened since then is that I had some contractor arrangement with it that maybe went away, and then Nancy Glenn, our vice president for research, also developed a more modern relationship with the same organization. And now we use it as this ongoing relationship that we kind of take turns writing into. So on this last contract, or whatever we call it, it's actually active right now. I got it last year for a project of this title. It was actually using one that Nancy established. And so that's a question, like we just kind of keep that one open, and the funding goes through the same contract, and I just happen to take over to be the PI, and then maybe Nancy will again in the future. So it is this long-term established relationship that we have going. And so based on a relationship that existed before. And so what we do is this place-based research, we'll call it. This schematic here is an illustration of generally what I do. I study watersheds and what happens with them. In general, this is a flow through. We have rain or snow as precipitation in some kind of time series. It dumps on a watershed and it spits out stream flow. And we observe it, and we write a bunch of equations to model it and predict it, all under the justification that if we have a better understanding of the physics of what happens inside a watershed, then we can make better predictions of what the watershed spits out as stream flow or groundwater or evapotranspiration. And we can also learn about or make forecasts, like if we change the input patterns, say in response to climate change or land use change or population growth and changing watersheds, we can then, if we've made good long-term observations, and can build our models to make better predictions. And so the project that we're working now, and these plots down here, I'll explain them. On this is just a condition that is, when I have the mean annual snow fraction, what that means is the percent of total precipitation that falls as snow versus rain. And so in our watersheds, if we go from elevation, we have down here, it's not much snow. Up here, it's mostly rain or mostly snow. And that's just a condition of looking at the mountain front. But what's happening, this poorly labeled plot, is at 3 different elevations, the changes in the annual snow fraction. Again, annual snow fraction is what percent of precipitation is snow. So a 1 would mean all snow, a 0 would mean all rain. And that relationship is, and this is now against year since 2020, when I first saw my friend Mark walking around in the rain at that flood. The snow fraction has been declining at all. These are 3 different elevations: low, middle, and high elevations. You don't even need statistics to see those trends. Snow is transition to rain, where spatially we have a rain to snow transition as elevation, and temporally we have a snow to rain transition. So this input signal is changing. We're going from snow to rain. And so the project we're working on now is, well, how will this change in the phase of precipitation impact what happens within a watershed, not just the hydrology, but the ecology and such, and what happens to the outputs as stream flow, groundwater, and evapotranspiration. And we're doing that in an observational and modeling environment. And I think that's all I have time for.
Unfortunately, yes, it's such a short amount of time, but thank you so much. Audience, if you have any questions, you have the next 3 minutes to ask.
I can shoot for one. So thanks, Jim. This is fascinating. And thank you for basically establishing the hydrology program at Boise State. I was wondering, where is the funding in USDA? I know NEFA, but that's a whole different thing. So where is the funding through ARS, or what are the channels?
That's a good question. And I will be honest, and actually sometimes even my colleague there doesn't know. And so this is where the relationship is important. Now I work with a scientist there named Andrew Hedrick. He was actually one of our PhD students. Now he works for there. And the same deal is like, hey, he basically wanted to fund a grad student to work in Reynolds Creek, and came to me and said, I think we have some kind of relationship where we get reduced overhead. It's like, yeah, that's the CESU, and I think we have a contract. And he went to his person, and I think they just have internal money. And so this is not a grant that they're getting. They have some kind of internal grant funding. I'm not exactly sure what it is. Andrew wasn't exactly sure either, but we got it through the CESU. And so basically internal money, I think, is the simple answer.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'd like to just follow up on that. Sometimes I'm asked by people who aren't familiar with the CESU system, gosh, what closet is all this secret money in? And it's not my understanding, and I it's not extra money. It's a mechanism for spending money that has already been budgeted or that will be budgeted through other means. So it's not an additional different source of funds. Mm-hmm. It's a means of getting those funds to these projects.
Right. So in this case, yeah, so it was just money that they had. I think there was some salary savings, these units just for some reason or other may have some budget surplus. And so it was a redirection of their internal money to us.
And if I may, just sort of one thing that Pei-Lin taught me and that I've seen is true is that part of the understanding how the agencies work is understanding some of the timing of their budget years and when they start to realize, as Jim was saying, we have some surplus here that we weren't expecting, and we would like to figure out a way of fulfilling some of our needs. And so if you as a faculty person are aware of that timing, then you'll be better positioned to be responsive to an RFP that comes out or some other CESU opportunity that comes out because they said, oh, we had some salary savings. Great, we can take care of that, that sagebrush study that we wanted to do.
Yes, and if I may, it seems to get earlier every year that the federal budget people begin to freak out and realize that the end of their fiscal year is upon them. It used to be July. I'm thinking it's getting now toward May when we're really trying to look at when we need to get money obligated. So that is something where if you have those good relationships, I in the past have worked with researchers or been that researcher. I've been on both sides of it, to where we actually get a scope and budget together and fill out the SF 450 424 forms, and get that all ready in a package, put it on the back burner and wait to hear if there are surplus funds coming available. That way you can actually at least get that RFP out quickly and get moving rather than go, oh, there's funds. Well, now let's start working on a scope, et cetera.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. McNamara. That was fantastic. We'll go ahead and move on to our next speaker, Dr. Pei-Lin Yu.
Well, thank
you. Dr. Pei-Lin Yu.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Yeah, no worries. Dr. Pei-Lin Yu is a mixed-race Taiwanese American archaeologist and ethnographer, and a Fulbright scholar. As a Boise State faculty member, she has conducted research on hunting and gathering peoples and traditional gardening subsistence in Taiwan, Japan, Southeast China, and Thailand. Yu also studies climate resiliency of cultural heritage resources in national parks and other protected lands. She has worked in cultural heritage stewardship for 4 federal agencies and 2 universities, including as a federal CESU coordinator. Yu currently serves as a tribal liaison for the Corps of Engineers as well as affiliate faculty at Boise State University. And today she's going to be talking to us about CESUs, national parks, and climate change in the American Southwest.
Thank you for that kind introduction and for the invitation. It's really exciting for me to see sort of how the CESUs are flourishing at Boise State and helping Boise State to flourish. I first learned what CESUs were when I started working for the Park Service as one of their CESU coordinators, and really enjoyed the ability to talk with so many gifted scholars across the country. I would mention Boise State University. I think that we touched on this as a member of 3 CESUs, as I'm aware of: Great Basin CESU, Rocky Mountains CESU, and the Pacific Northwest CESU, which is pretty cool, covers a lot of the areas that our people work in. But I would also mention that our expertise, which is fabulous, can be reached by any agency in any CESU we are a member of. So let's say there's somebody in Hawaii who wants to work with one of our researchers. They can access us through the CESU system. Somebody in Alaska can access us through the CESU system. So don't feel geographically constrained. If you're doing work in anywhere in the United States or our territories, they can reach you through the CESU system if their agency is a participant. And I think most of the agencies these days are. So just a little plug for those of you who don't work in our immediate area. I've personally tinkered around with agreements both on the federal side and also on the university side as a researcher. So I've gotten to see how the whole thing works. You can do CESUs. Basically, research is the most commonly understood area for doing CESU work with agencies, but you can also do technical assistance, which means a wide variety of tasks. For example, the ones that I'm familiar with is things like archaeological survey, biological survey and monitoring. These things can also be done through CESUs, even education and communications related work. We even had the College of Business working in a CESU agreement. So the only things that are exempted from them are basically architecture, engineering, and construction. Pretty much everything else is on the table, as I understand it. So that's pretty groovy. And the project that I worked on most recently as a Boise State researcher is at 4 gorgeous national park units in the American Southwest, which are not terribly well known, but really wonderful. There's Salinas Pueblos National Monument, Pecos National Historic Site, Bandelier National Monument. Also, I've worked with San Antonio Missions. And actually there's several more, but I won't rattle them all off. These are parks that are in climates that are desert-like, but that are high desert and used to have warm summers, but not terribly hot summers. They're not like Mojave Desert type parks, and also winters that were somewhat predictable, cold not too much snow. I grew up in Albuquerque, and I remember how those winters used to be. With the way that climate is working now, we're seeing a few things. For example, we're getting fires of severity that we've not seen before. So what that happens is it basically removes all the vegetation from around these ancient sites and historic sites. And then we're having storm events that are much more severe than they used to be. So really big storms, warmer, as we know, warmer air holds more moisture. And so the desert storms we're getting it's just insane. Bandelier National Monument had an enormous fire upslope of them, and then an immense flood activity right after the fire that caused a mud, like a tsunami of mud, to sweep through that ruin. And it threatened all of the museum and visitor center. They had to evacuate all of the art objects and artifacts from there, and the personnel and the furniture and all these things. And this was something that nobody has seen before in national parks. So we know that parks are getting more vulnerable to climate change. And the vulnerability assessments that are being done by the Park Service are some of the best in the country, because they started them literally the instant the lid came off after George W. Bush left office and we were allowed to say climate change again. Ken Salazar said, okay, here's a bunch of money, Park Service, get going now, because you never know what's going to happen, as we just found out on Tuesday. So we started doing vulnerability assessments in all 416 plus National Park Service units. And we're doing a lot of things with natural resources, with fish and insects, water and ice, as James is familiar with, birds, trees, forests, fire regimes, all these things. And yet more than half of our National Park Service units are related to human beings and human cultures and stories, and we completely ignored that and didn't fund it. So we're playing some catch up. The project that I'm doing here is building a quantified way to measure vulnerability of these ancient sites to climate change. And we adjust it for exposure to different kinds of stressors, whether it be fire, wind, extreme water events, or extreme heat. The extreme heat that's happening down in Texas is really doing a number on some of these ancient buildings. So we're working on a measurable way to quantify damage that could occur during these things, which helps the Park Service get ahead of it. They have a responsibility to preserve these places for future generations, and they're really facing some uphill battles. So I'll stop right there and take any questions that you might have. About this project or any of the CESU stuff that I maybe can try or lob back to Bob.
Well, I'm going to post something in the chat about all the federal partners that are currently member of any CESU, and as Pei-Lin mentioned, which are accessible through our membership. And Pei-Lin, we are not, in fact, a member of the Pacific Northwest CESU. That was something that you and I had talked about, but because in many ways, because of the fact that we're in both Great Basin and Rocky Mountain, because of the availability of that, yeah, so that link is there.
Thank you for that presentation. I was curious, it sounds like you visited and worked with a lot of national parks. Do you have a favorite one, and can you sort of explain how the CESU helped with that particular project?
Oh my gosh, that's like, what's your favorite child? I love the parks so very, very much. Some of them are parks that we don't know very well. So I'll sort of throw one out there, a little park that you all should visit next time you're up in the area of running around Missoula/Deer Lodge, Montana area. There's a little gem of a park called Grant Coors Ranch. Have any of you heard of Grant Coors Ranch? It's adorable. So this is a family ranch that literally was sort of preserved in time by its family very lovingly for about 150 years. And then they asked the Park Service to acquire it and care for it and keep it as a functioning ranch. According to, they function at about sort of 1920s through 1950s style ranching, with a few references to some of the earlier eras. This ranch is called Cultural Park. It's filled with wildlife. The animals adore this park. It's extremely popular with birds. It's along a flyway. And so the CESU is a great mechanism for researchers to do some basic inventory of the animals and plants that are here on this old ranching landscape, and to learn how the ranching practices actually did foster a lot of ecological diversity within that area, which I think the Nature Conservancy is also getting pretty hip to. This is a park where nobody really was thinking about doing a big bird inventory or a big fish inventory. And it turned out that there are many, many species benefiting from the way the place has been managed, first by the ranching family and now by the Park Service. So that's just one kind of surprising example. Thank you for the question. It's great. I think Marie and Graaff maybe had a question.
Yeah, I had one, and then I was like, should I ask it? Should I not? But I'm going to ask it since I've been thinking about it. So I think this is such a great mechanism to get projects funded in a relatively easy way if you have the connections. And it's especially useful. It's always useful. It's really nice if you don't have a lot of time to write a big proposal, to get an agreement together with a partner and to get it funded, and maybe even to use it as seed funding for a bigger proposal later on. I wonder how we can connect more people, especially from some of the departments or places across campus that have traditionally not had as much grant funding, to get connected with people to tap into this, because I think that's still a big barrier, to actually go and connect with somebody. What can we do to really make that easy?
I can start with that and maybe hand it along to Bob and others. Sounds like March 13th is one great opportunity, is to
That's
get
right. Yes.
Shake hands.
That's
now
right.
that COVID is over, we can actually meet again and talk with people. I know that there are other gatherings sometimes that convene. For example, some of you may be within the HCRI group. I know that they have mixers as well. I think one mechanism, and this is something that I was kind of thinking about when I stopped being a full-time faculty member at Boise State. Faculty 180 actually has an area where you can put in keywords for your skills and interests and specializations. And I don't think a lot of faculty know about that tab. Last time I filled mine out, which was a few years ago, it was still there. Please put some key words in there so that people who are doing a search, I would encourage you to do that. You search yourself as well. See, for example, I do climate change research, so I was typing in climate change and vulnerability and finding, names pop up of faculty members who have also put that in. And Catherine and Bob, I don't know if this is something that could possibly be of interest, and maybe to talk to the OSP. But sometimes federal agencies will actually come to universities and say, we've got a problem, we have a need. Who at your university does this? If more of our faculty are putting their skills and interests and expertise into Faculty 180, somebody at OSP or DRED or the Center for Research and Scholarly Activity could go in there and do a search and come up with actually a list of people who have listed that as their area. So I'll sort of put a little plug in for that. I think that tab is still there and available, and that might be another thing to follow up on to make us easier to find.
A couple of other things I'll add to that. First, some of this falls within my responsibility as representative to the Rocky Mountain and Great Basin CESUs. So by which I mean, if people are interested and they've heard about this mechanism and they are familiar with an agency that they think, there's a potential there for us to build something, they should talk to me, and I'm happy to figure out what I can to help them with that. That's part of my role. And I've done that for a few people. For example, there's an effort underway to try to figure out if we can develop an internship program through a CESU and BLM and try to fill BLM agency needs. And so thanks to some help from a variety of people on campus and then people through the Rocky Mountain CESU, we got some example existing agreements that we could try to model this after. And we've set up some notes about that. And then next week, I'm headed to the executive committee meeting for the Rocky Mountain CESU. And one of the items on the agenda is there is another CESU unit that or network that has like a basically faculty agency mixer database kind of thing, or matching database kind of thing. So we're going to talk about whether that's something that would be practical and sustainable in the long run.
Thank you. And the library is also working on a new type of database. I think it'd be good to connect with them as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I hate to cut it off because this is such a great conversation. We need to move on to our next presenter. Dr. Yu, thank you so much. That was a fantastic presentation and great news about the national parks. So we will go ahead and move on to our next speaker, Dr. Sadegh. Dr. Sadegh is an associate professor of civil engineering at Boise State University. He is a civil and environmental engineer by training and a climatologist by passion. Moji received his PhD in civil and environmental engineering from the University of California, Irvine in 2015. He uses geospatial analysis, machine learning, statistical methods, and data fusion/integration techniques, as well as satellites, climate, and socioeconomic data to unravel mechanisms that drive climate extremes to their societal impacts. He's going to be talking to us today about evolving Western wildfires and their impacts.
Thank you so much, Catherine, and thank you all for being here. Thanks for inviting me as well, Brett. My funding through CESUs have come through two agencies so far. One has been the Bureau of Reclamation. We put a proposal together with one of their employees to their national call, and we got it, and CSU came in, which was a difficult process, mainly because their local office did not really know the process. And so that was, that was a process to figure out. But the easiest route for me has been the Joint Fire Science Program, which is the funding mechanism through the Bureau of Land Management and the Forest Service has they both have a funding mechanism, funding route together. That's the Joint Fire Science Program. That's an open call competition almost every year. So we got grants through them, and some of the projects that I'm presenting here were funded through those two mechanisms. So I work on the nexus of climate, humans, and wildfires. So how climate is impacting wildfires, how wildfires are impacting humans, humans are impacting both the climate and wildfires. One of the projects that we have worked with Forest Service, for example, is on the top right. We have looked into satellite imageries of where burned areas are, and we looked at where the elevation of those high elevation forest fires are. As Pei-Lin was talking about some of these areas that have not really observed fires before, now observing them, this is exactly what's happening. So what we have shown is from 1984 to 2000, all the way to 2017, the elevation of high elevation forest fires have gone up 252 meters. That's almost 800 feet. Meaning that the forest that was too wet and cold to burn frequently in 1984 is now dry and hot enough that can burn frequently. And that has exposed an additional 81,500 square kilometers of forest to regular burns, which they weren't back in 84. In another project on the top left, we know that impacts on humans from wildfires have been increasing. In the past summer and fall, we have had several fires around Boise. Luckily, no structural damage yet. But in any case, across the US, we see a lot more impacts from wildfires. What we have done in this project is we basically overlaid where the wildfire parameters are and where human settlements are, and we quantified how many people were exposed to wildfires and how that changed from 2000 to 2019. What we have observed is that direct exposures to wildfires by humans, so this is the number of people that had residence within wildfire burned area, has more than doubled across the US in the past 20 years. Compared to burned area increased by 40%. The number of humans being impacted or the number of humans being directly exposed increased by more than 125%. So it's not just that fires are becoming larger. The rate of impact or the rate of increase in impact on humans is increasing at a much larger rate compared to the rate of increase in burned area. Also, roads have been exceedingly exposed to wildfires, 60% increase in 2 decades. Highway 21 was closed for much of summer because of the wildfires. Highway 84 was closed a lot this summer. So a lot more roads are being exposed, and also more electric power lines are being exposed to wildfires. And also, there is a lot of discussion whether humans are building their structures in areas that burn later. Is it the wildfires that are encroaching upon existing human communities? In this study, we showed that it's mainly the wildfires that have gone rogue and encroach upon existing communities. Increase in wildland-urban interface will increase the risk, but the direct exposure were mainly driven by those climate-driven increase in intense wildfire behavior. Now, what can we do? Part of what we can do is to prevent those wildfires. 84% of all wildfires across the US are human started. If we know when and where they are more probable to happen, we can come up with strategies to prevent them. Now, we have developed a model that takes a variety of factors like weather, land cover, topography, infrastructure, etc., and the model predicts when and where the probability of human ignition is higher. And this is across the Western US, 4 kilometer, 1 kilometer resolution, daily resolution. And I'm out of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sadegh. Yeah, like I said, it goes so quick. For the interest of time, I think we're just going to keep it to one audience question from here on out. So please, if you have a question, ask it.
This has been a great conversation. Love the presentations. I'm learning a lot today. Moji, I'm curious, like with the work that you've already done, the relationships that you've established, what do you foresee like future opportunities through this mechanism, if any?
There are plenty. So it used to be that I would have to knock on doors to get those opportunities. But now, with all the work that we have done across different agencies, it has become so that, every now and then I receive this email, hey, there is this opportunity. Are you interested in joining us? So it has become a lot easier. It takes time to build these relationships. It takes time for them to pick up. But especially now with NSF pushing for user-inspired research, this is user-inspired research. Those people that you work with across these agencies are the people that bring you a lot of great ideas. First of all, I learned from them what are some of those challenges? What are some of those issues that they have? And basically, a lot of the research that we pursue is built upon the learnings from those conversations that we have across agencies. Thank you, Chad.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Sadegh. That was a fantastic presentation, especially with, the concerns of wildfires and how much more they're increasing every year. So it was great information. Thank you. We'll go ahead and move on to our next speaker, Dr. Marianne de Graaff. Dr. Marianne de Graaff is a professor in the Department of Biological Sciences. Her research advances a basic understanding of plant-soil relationships to improve soil management for sustainable agriculture, inform ecosystem restoration practices, and predict and mitigate atmospheric CO2 concentrations through soil carbon sequestration. Marianne grew up in the Netherlands and received a Bachelor's of Science and a Master's of Science in Forestry and Environmental Management and a PhD in Environmental Science from Wageningen University. While all of her degrees were granted by Wageningen University, she conducted all of her PhD work at UC Davis in collaboration with the ETH in Switzerland. After completing her PhD, she accepted a postdoctoral position in the Bioscience Division at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. She moved to Boise State University in 2010, where she leads the Ecosystem Ecology Lab, teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in ecology, and is the Associate Dean for Research, Creative Activity, and Graduate Education in the College of Arts and Sciences. She's going to talk to us today about utilizing CESUs to build community and foster long-term research collaborations with local agencies.
Thanks, Catherine. That was awesome. And you say Wageningen really, really well. It was really impressive.
I practiced, thank you.
All right, so I have worked with CESUs for a really long time, and they've been a really important vehicle for me to build community both within the university and between my lab and local agencies. And they've really helped me establish and sustain long-term experiments. And they also provide opportunities to apply for more funding through other mechanisms. So they kind of provide a seed funding base that is easily accessible. Today, I will talk about how I got involved with CESUs and how CESU helped me sustain relationships with CESU partners. And then I will talk about a few of the projects that I have, so you get a little bit of an idea of the kind of work that they fund. I have to say that it's a little bit embarrassing to admit, but I did not get engaged with CESU intentionally at all. In fact, I had no idea about the existence of it, but I did quickly realize that CESUs provided a great mechanism to get my projects funded with local agencies. So every time I started working with a CESU, it kind of happened like this. I met a scientist from like a local agency, like the USGS, the conservation branch of the Idaho Military Division, or the Forest Service, and we would simply discuss opportunities for collaborative projects. Often I would just, go out, get some coffee with somebody, and we would just talk about projects. And then once we decided we'd like to work together, we would start working on an agreement. And the agreement was then informed by both their needs, that's where it would usually start, and my research interest. And we'd kind of go back and forth on ideas to make sure that each one of us was satisfied with the resulting scope of work. And then if we were, then after that, I'd create a budget to go with it. And at that point, I would take that to OSP and ask them about the best way to get it funded. That's where I was very uncertain about what to do next. And OSP was very helpful. They say, okay, well, your partner has a CESU, so we can just route your proposal through that mechanism and get it funded. So that was super seamless for both me and my partner. And by doing that, by it being so seamless, it lowered barriers to initiate new projects. And it also helped sustain my projects in the long term. So in this way, CESU really contributes to long-term relationships. Now I'm going to the projects here. So the pictures that you see show students and agency collaborators at a number of projects that are supported through CESU. The top left one is a project in collaboration with the conservation branch of the Idaho Military Division, where we set out to evaluate if we can use biochar as a soil amendment to improve sagebrush seedling performance in an old fire scar where restoration efforts have always been quite unsuccessful. Biochar is like a pyrolyzed biomass that has a highly porous structure, and so it can improve soil structure. It can improve microbial growth in the soil and water retention. And so it can really benefit restoration in a degraded ecosystem. The cool thing is that this particular project that you see here was informed by two other projects supported through CESUs. The first one started in 2011, right after I came to Boise State, and I started my partnership with the Idaho Military Division. And so it has supported more than 25 undergraduate students in independent research projects, 4 graduate students, of which one is now a professor in Bonn in Germany. And we still work together. And another student works for the city, and we've established a project together indirectly as a result of the work done through the CESU. Now, at the right of this picture, you see one that represents my partnership with the Forest Service. It's a project in which we ask if seeding with increasing diversity of plant species in a seed mix promotes restoration success. And that project was initiated in 2019, right after a fire happened near Bruneau Dunes. And our partner helped us get permits from the BLM to work in this area. And then the Forest Service and the BLM together helped us set up experimental field plots. So there's also a lot of in-kind support that was made possible by the CESU, and that's really instrumental to the success of that work. In this picture, you see my grad student who is now turned into my lab manager, one of the undergrads working in my lab, another grad student, and a high school teacher who is supported by a grant from the Murdoch Charitable Trust. And so the fields experiments that I have that are supported by the CESU have helped me also recruit and support local high school teachers who do research in the lab in the summer, and then they take their knowledge back to their middle and high schools. And then finally, at the bottom of the slide, you see a project in collaboration with the Forest Service as well, just a different group within the Forest Service that sets out to restore a local open pit mine near Idaho City. And my collaborator from the Forest Service on this project is really happy with our work together because it helps him stay engaged with students, which is awesome. And in the picture, you see undergraduate students, graduate students, and a bunch of Forest Service employees all coming together to set up experimental field plots. We are wearing hazmat suits here that were provided by the Forest Service because there are elevated levels of heavy metals at that site. And so this work also supports me working with a new collaborator in the Department of Chemistry, which is very exciting. So in summary, I'm really thankful for the CESU mechanism because it reduced barriers for collaborations. It opened many opportunities to build community. It supports student learning and initiates and sustains long-term research projects that have a local impact. That's what I got.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. de Graaff. Do we have a question from the audience? I have a question. I was going to ask, what kind of opportunities do you think you've been afforded working with CESUs that you might not have been able to have not working with CESUs over your career?
I think a big difference between the projects that I've gotten funded through CESU and other projects that were funded by like National Science Foundation or DOE is that these projects were more local. The CESU projects were more local, and they are more based on relationships and community building. And so it provides a really accessible ecosystem, pun intended, for all my students to work in. It's like a playground out of the back door. So that's a big difference. And I realize not every CESU has to be like that because Pei-Lin showed a different kind of collaboration, but it is possible to set things up close to home that are easily accessible.
Awesome.
Pei-Lin?
Thank you so much.
It's a bit of an observation really, rather than a question, but I'm so thrilled to see the level of student benefit and participation in all of these projects, and especially with yours just now. And I wanted to mention the Rocky Mountains CESU actually has awards for student research, and they're funded awards. So I would point out that those will probably come out. They usually are announced, I think, in the winter time. And then the student gets an award, and they also come to the executive meeting, which Bob will be attending, and they make a presentation to the agency reps, which is groovy as anything. And then also there are research funds available through the Rocky Mountains CESU. They have two or three special funding sources, and those are announced at different times of the year. But Boise State, I think we've had 5 students at Boise State whose PhD or master's level research has been completely funded through a CESU student research award. So there's some nifty things that come along, aside from moving money, to researchers and to their students. There's actually awards and recognition too, that really help launch students in a great way.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. de Graaff. That was wonderful to hear. And yes, it's so great to hear projects that involve students and community. I think that those are some of the best projects that we have going at Boise State. We'll go ahead and move on to our final speaker, Dr. Jared Talley. Dr. Jared Talley was born and raised in southwestern Idaho and now seeks to help rural communities adapt and thrive in a rapidly changing world. He's an assistant professor in the School of Public Service at Boise State University, earning his PhD in philosophy from Michigan State University and his MPA in environmental policy and natural resource management from Boise State University. As an interdisciplinary scholar, he seeks to better understand how communities relate to the land and how this relationship poses obstacles and opportunities for collaboration and governance. Specifically, he studies grazing management and public land permitting, community-led conservation programs, rural education and entrepreneurship, and place-based environmental governance, all in the context of the Intermountain American West. He'll be talking to us today about salmon recovery in Idaho. It's a damn people issue.
Well, hi, everybody. I know we're running up against the 2 o'clock hour, so if you have to leave, I am not offended. So I'll just hang out and chat with whoever's left. I'm actually most proud about this title than anything here, salmon recovery. It's a damn people issue. But realistically, it's actually how the CESU came about. The governor of Idaho in 2019 released 26 policy recommendations for salmon recovery in Idaho. And they range from hatcheries and harvest and habitat recovery and all of these things. But a policy recommendation is really just symbolic. It doesn't actually do anything. It's just I recommend we do this policy. Now get off my back, right? Sort of thing. And so I started thinking, I was tasked with trying to figure out how to implement this with the governor's office of species conservation. And I told him we couldn't implement it without understanding how the people of Idaho actually felt about these policy recommendations. And they said, okay, well, tell us how they feel. I said, well, that'll cost you about $65,000. They said, nope. And so they said, how about go talk to the Bureau of Reclamation? And actually, Pei-Lin, I'm glad you're here. I was a master's student in 2014, and I remember Pei-Lin at one point talking about CESUs. And I knew that mechanism existed because of that. And so when I was talking to Bureau of Reclamation, I said, I know we have this mechanism. We have a need. We need to figure out how people are thinking about salmon recovery, not just how the natural science is thinking about salmon recovery. And so they agreed. And so they funded this project to understand how people, Idaho residents, feel about the array of policy recommendations on the board to fund or to push salmon recovery forward. And the hook here is that we have spent an economic analysis done by Yeager and Shurel here in 2023 shows that we have spent over the past 40 years, $9 billion as a nation in the Pacific Northwest and have not increased the abundance of wild fish populations, salmon populations at all. That's $9 billion of conservation that we've done nothing. We've increased harvest populations or hatchery populations, but not wild populations. And there's a problem with genetic biodiversity for that. And so that's what I came to Bureau of Rec and I said, what we might need to be thinking about is instead of spending another $9 billion over the next 40 years on understanding the natural science of the fish, we also probably ought to think about the social science. Because out of that $9 billion, a very, very, very small fraction of that has been dedicated to understand the people in this issue. And so they agreed. And so this project has funded 3 large data collection initiatives, survey instruments. We need a power analysis tells us we need about 320 people to respond to get generalized responses from Idaho because we have such a small population, We got 750 for each survey, so we can oversample on rural and urban. And there are different instruments, experimental designs, so we can triangulate the positions. And the idea here is we're trying to figure out, of all of the competing conservation recommendations, we're trying to figure out how people actually weigh those competitions. It's not just when we say, let's remove dams, people are saying, well, how do we feel about dams or not? It's, well, how do we feel about boating? How do we feel about fishing? How do we feel about power costs? How do we feel about water availability and water management? It's the competition that actually matters here. And so the way we've set this up is to tease that out. Quickly, I'll just say a couple of our big findings is 93% of Idaho supports salmon recovery, which is really interesting because we can't really make a lot of headway. So why can't we make headway if everyone supports it? And that just kind of gives credence to this idea that it's a much more complex question than just, do you like them or not? We find absolutely no difference between rural and urban respondents across any of the questions, which is not what we would initially expect. And there's some reasons that we're thinking for that. The last thing I'll say that we found, that's my 5 minutes, is that also the thing that people care most about in all of those weighing demands used through a willingness to pay model is, we found this through a willingness to pay model, is access to recreation. That's what they actually care most about. Not their energy bill, not their water availability, not the risk to flooding. It was, they want access to the water and they don't care if we save the salmon. So there we go. That's what I have. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Dr. Talley. Does anyone have a question to ask? It looks like Karen asked a question in the chat. She says, you may have addressed this, but I wonder what the typical budget and time range are. When faculty are considering projects, what scope might they consider and for how long?
Well, I think there is no typical. As I mentioned at the beginning, we've got agreements in place that are anywhere from $1,500 all the way up to, almost $1 million. But the median range, as I think I mentioned before, I think I had that on the slide, was $30,000 in terms of the amount of money available. And then time range is, again, that's very variable. Just speaking for myself, one of mine was for 1 year and another is for 5 years.
Jared, just out of curiosity with that question, how long is this project the salmon recovery looking to range?
I initially had it for 1.5 years and then had to do an extension just because of some things that came up that we couldn't really control. And it was really easy. I mean, it's really, really nice to be able to work through these because you do have a relationship with your partner. And it's like, I just called the Bureau of Reclamation who funded. I called the person at Bureau of Rec that I'd been talking to the entire time. I said, hey, I'm going to need some more time. And he said, oh, we get it. No worries. Just send your no-cost extension through. And it was the easiest process. Reporting is easier. I mean, like just as a funding mechanism, simplifies the mechanism to get with the best parts out of the funding without the kind of rigmarole on the back end.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Talley. That was a fantastic presentation, and hearing about the conservation efforts and kind of all of that factors that go into it, it's definitely an interesting topic to look at all the different facets and aspects of it. Thank you to all of our speakers who gave us this wonderful projects and information about CESUs. We really appreciate your time.